Go to the Jordanian capital and speak to Tahani Mustafa, a Palestine analyst for the International Crisis Group. Tahani, thank you so much for your time. How surprised were you that that meeting happened?
It's no surprise at all. At the moment, the situation is on a knife edge. We're seeing Israeli actions become more provocative, more aggressive, more intrusive, especially now with the new extreme right-wing government in Israel. And you're also now seeing Palestinian discontent growing even further into violent opposition. There's been a proliferation of armed factions across much of the West Bank. Tension points have spread. Now it's not just the north any longer. It's now the south, East Jerusalem. So it really came as no surprise. And I think what tends to get missed here is that the PA itself has a mutually dependent relationship on Israel here. This isn't a zero-sum game between the two. These groups are also affecting PA hegemony in these areas. So it really came as no surprise. Effectively, the opposition that was coming from the Palestinian side against this summit was primarily against security coordination. And given the situation on the ground, this is exactly what this summit attempted to achieve, which is ensuring that there is consistent security coordination between the Israelis, between the Palestinians, and more importantly, that the Palestinian Authority has the capability to try and stabilize things on the ground.
Have you understood exactly what that Israeli commitment about illegal settlements is? The NGO Peace Now says 132 settlements have been established in the West Bank, another 147 outposts, which are not considered legal under Israeli law as well. And settlers over the past few years, it says they've been erecting scores of outposts without government permission. And then we have the Netanyahu tweet saying that we're going to continue the expansion in these two particular areas. And yet what we understand is that Israel says it won't discuss further expansions. So are they the same thing or not?
It's difficult to tell because Israel is this government has primarily launched its electoral campaign, its electoral promises on an expansionist agenda. And what it's now been doing is not only effectively legalizing plans for expansions, but also discussing further expansions, which, ultimately means new settlements that we can expect. And that comes as no surprise. Again, yes, this summit was intended to prevent unilateral action from both sides that could make the situation worse on the ground. But let's not forget that a couple of days ago, we saw the US managed to forestall a UN Security Council resolution condemning Israel for settlement expansion and demanding a halt to future activity to avoid the embarrassment of having to veto what would have been a legally binding vote. Yet a couple of days before that, again, Israel had effectively legalized nine settlement outposts in the West Bank. So, it doesn't matter what kind of assurances the international or even regional efforts are trying to obtain. It's clear that Israel, especially with this new government, is unwilling to halt its expansionist agenda. And the attempt here is to deliberately alter demographic realities on the ground.
And whatever measures the Palestinian Authority takes, whatever advice it gives to Palestinians, do you think that actually there are too many people on the streets, especially the youth, who actually feel as if the Palestinian Authority is out of touch with their reality, and therefore whatever's been decided in Jordan may not actually make a difference to how Palestinians feel about their own lives and what they can do to protest against that existence, which, as we know, multiple international organizations over the past couple of years have said quite simply, this is apartheid.
Absolutely. I mean, this summit in Aqaba, the US attempt a couple of days ago and then followed by the US-led Aqaba summit was intended to do that. It was intended to gain assurances from both sides. But ultimately, as I said, there have been absolutely no pressures on Israel to halt the continued deterioration that it's creating on the ground, especially for Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority has been largely aloof from the violence happening. President Abbas has done very little other than to blame Israel for the escalating violence. Yes, the PA has called for UN Security Council intervention to protect Palestinians, but at the same time, it's still continuing to actively engage with Israel, despite calls from critics, from opposition groups, from the various Palestinian factions, even from the PLO Executive Committee itself, not to have engaged in yesterday's summit. So yes, absolutely. We're seeing the proliferation of armed factions across much of the West Bank, but this is coming at a time when not only are we seeing increased support for armed resistance, which is something like 72% so far, but at the same time, this is happening against the backdrop of a Palestinian Authority that is experiencing the worst economic and political crisis in its history. Its ability to govern is severely impaired, and more importantly, it's lost most of its traction and legitimacy in the eyes of Palestinians.
Tahani, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much. Tahani Mustafa in Amman.
Thank you.